The snow had just begun to fall on Monday, January 20th, 2025, 3:15 p.m., when the silence of Interstate 91 near Newport, Vermont, was shattered by a burst of gunfire. The isolated road stretched like a frozen ribbon along the Canadian border, the kind of place where traffic stops were routine, where agents watched for smugglers, and where danger often came cloaked in silence. But that afternoon, it would become the stage for a federal agent's final stand. Border Patrol Agent Chris Maland, 38 years old, had pulled over a dark sedan with tinted windows. His radio crackled faintly as he confirmed the stop. Vehicle on I-91, plate number registered out of state. 2 occupants inside, he reported. His tone was calm, measured. But the truth was, something about this car felt off. Inside the sedan sat Teresa Youngblut, just 21 years old, her pale hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. In the passenger seat beside her was a man with a German passport, a figure authorities would later describe only as a male German citizen, his immigration status already flagged as questionable. They weren't just travelers passing through. They were part of something darker, something investigators would soon call the Zizians, a mysterious group linked to 6 deaths across 3 states. As Maland approached the driver's side, his boots crunching against the icy shoulder, the German leaned slightly toward Youngblut. Witnesses later said he whispered something in German, his voice sharp and urgent. Youngblut's jaw tightened. She had already decided what she was going to do. License and registration, Maland said, his voice steady, his hand resting on the edge of the window. But instead of papers, the door flew open. Without warning, Youngblut stepped out, raising a handgun with chilling precision. The first shot cracked through the icy air, striking Maland before he had time to reach for his weapon. Shots fired! Shots fired! An agent shouted over the radio as chaos erupted. Other Border Patrol units nearby rushed to the scene. What had begun as a routine stop turned into a storm of bullets echoing across the frozen highway. By the time the gunfire fell silent, Agent Maland lay mortally wounded, his body shielded by nothing more than his green Border Patrol jacket. The German citizen was dead, his lifeless body slumped against the snow-dusted asphalt. Teresa Youngblut stood alive, her weapon smoking, her face a mixture of defiance and dread. But this wasn't just a single crime. It was the ignition of something bigger, an unraveling thread that investigators would follow back through weeks of strange encounters, eerie sightings, and a shadowy network no one fully understood. Just days before the shooting, a hotel employee had called in a tip. 2 suspicious figures, later identified as Youngblut and her German companion, had checked into a cheap roadside inn. They were seen wearing tactical gear. They looked like they were preparing for war, the clerk recalled. And they were armed. That same afternoon, Newport residents reported seeing the pair in a Walmart parking lot. Witnesses claimed the German was wrapping strange objects in aluminum foil, hiding them inside bags. It was like he didn't want anyone to see what was inside, one shopper later testified. By January 20th, those warnings had become reality. The investigation that followed painted a chilling portrait. According to federal documents, both suspects had been armed during the stop. The German carried a rifle. Youngblut had at least 2 handguns. It was no accident. It was an ambush waiting for the right moment. What remained unclear was why. Who exactly were the Zizians, and what did they want? Investigators traced the group's name to cryptic online forums, encrypted chat rooms where members spoke of violence, rebellion, and cryptic symbols. But beyond the whispers, little was known. For the agents who survived the firefight, the memory would never fade. One testified, she didn't hesitate. She opened that door, raised her weapon, and pulled the trigger without a word. Maland never had a chance. In the days after the shooting, Vermont's quiet towns were gripped with fear. Border residents wondered, were the Zizians still out there? Were they connected to other unsolved killings in neighboring states? The FBI called it a domestic terror investigation. The Department of Justice called it capital murder. By Thursday, August 15, 2025, 9 a.m., the Department of Justice made its move. A federal grand jury in Vermont returned a 4-count superseding indictment against Teresa Youngblut. The charges included the murder of Agent Maland, assault of 2 additional agents, and related firearms offenses. The Attorney General of the United States, Pamela Bondi, authorized the ultimate punishment, the death penalty. Federal prosecutors filed notice of intent. Youngblut, just 21 years old, would now face the most severe consequence the justice system could deliver. But the court filings only deepened the mystery. Buried in the indictment were references to ongoing investigations, linking the Zizians to 6 deaths in 3 states. 6 families waiting for answers. 6 lives already gone. And now, the trail of blood had reached Vermont. The community of Newport mourned Maland with a candlelight vigil on January 24, 2025, 7 p.m. Snow fell gently as residents gathered at the border station. His wife, holding their 2 young children, spoke softly to the crowd. Chris died doing what he loved, protecting us. But his story isn't over. Justice has to be done. For investigators, justice meant uncovering the truth about Teresa Youngblut. Who was this 21-year-old? How had she fallen into the orbit of the Zizians? And what dark mission had carried her across state lines, armed and ready to kill? Her social media pages offered fragments of a troubled life. Posts about government distrust, obscure references to online conspiracies, photographs of rifles and coded phrases. But nothing explained the violence that unfolded on that frozen highway. Still, one thing was certain. She was no ordinary drifter. And the Zizians, whatever their origins, were more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The story of January 20th, 2025, 3:15 p.m. was only the beginning. The deeper investigators dug, the more disturbing the connections became. And as court proceedings began, a terrifying possibility emerged. That Youngblut was not acting alone, and that others within the Zizians might still be plotting their next move. The United States government was preparing to prosecute a 21-year-old woman for the cold-blooded murder of a federal agent. But beneath the surface, there was another battle, a fight to understand the network she belonged to, before more lives were lost. The question hung heavy in the courtroom and across the nation. Was Teresa Youngblut a lone extremist, or just the first Zizian to be caught? The answer would change everything. When January 20th, 2025, 3:15 p.m. ended in gunfire, the world of law enforcement changed forever. Agent Chris Maland was gone. A German national lay dead. And Teresa Youngblut, a 21-year-old drifter with ties to an obscure group called the Zizians, had been arrested, her hands still trembling as agents pulled the smoking weapon from her grip. But this was no ordinary crime. Within hours, the FBI declared the case a domestic terrorism investigation, sending analysts to sift through encrypted messages, digital trails, and unexplained deaths in other states. By the next morning, January 21 to 6:45 a.m., FBI agents swarmed the hotel room Youngblut and her German companion had rented in the days before the shooting. The door was forced open. Inside, investigators found tactical gear spread across the bed, rifles, ammunition, maps of the Vermont-Canada border, and notebooks filled with strange symbols. On one wall, scratched into the cheap plaster, was a single word: Zizians. The notebooks would become the most chilling discovery. Pages upon pages of cryptic writing, half diary, half manifesto. Some passages detailed plans for actions against the system. Others listed names of individuals, law enforcement among them. The handwriting shifted between English and German, a collaboration between Youngblut and her companion. Federal agents began connecting dots. In New Hampshire, December 2024, 2 hikers had been found shot to death near a state park trail. Their deaths were unsolved. In Maine, January 10, 2025, 8:30 p.m., a man was found in his truck, killed execution style. And in upstate New York, a retired corrections officer had been gunned down in his driveway. Each scene bore similarities: precision, ambush, and a trail of shell casings consistent with the weapons seized from Youngblut's room. By January 25, 11 a.m., the FBI announced what locals feared. The Zizians were connected to at least 6 deaths across 3 states. The media frenzy was immediate. Headlines screamed, "Cult-like group behind border shootout." Who are the Zizians? Youngblut faces death penalty in border agent killing. For the people of Newport, the grief turned into paranoia. Parents kept children home from school. Neighbors reported every strange face on their street. Rumors spread of more Zizians hiding in Vermont woods. Inside the courtroom, though, there was no room for rumor, only evidence. At Youngblut's first hearing, the U.S. attorney stood before the judge. His voice was sharp, unwavering. Your Honor, the defendant deliberately executed a federal agent. She was armed, she was prepared, and she was part of an organized group responsible for at least 6 other murders. The United States intends to seek the death penalty. Youngblut, dressed in an orange jumpsuit, stared ahead blankly. When asked to enter a plea, she simply whispered, "Not guilty." Her defense attorney offered a narrative that shocked many. My client is a 21-year-old young woman manipulated by older extremists. She is not the mastermind prosecutors make her out to be. She was indoctrinated, groomed, and coerced. But the prosecution had their ace: forensic analysis. The pistols seized from Youngblut matched the fatal round that killed Agent Maland. Gunshot residue covered her hands. Bodycam footage, though partially obscured by the chaos, captured her raising the weapon first. And in her own notebook, one chilling line stood out: "When the time comes, I will not hesitate." By February 5, 2025, 2:30 p.m., the grand jury heard testimony from surviving agents. One recalled, "She opened the door, and it was instant. No hesitation. No warning. Maland never had a chance." The defense tried to paint Youngblut as a pawn, a troubled girl swept up by a dangerous ideology, pressured by her German companion. But prosecutors reminded the jury the companion was dead. Only she had chosen to pull the trigger that day. Then came the revelation that rocked the case even further. FBI cyber units decrypted one of the Zizian chat rooms. Hidden behind layers of encryption, they found messages that appeared to reference the Vermont shooting before it happened. One message, dated January 19 to 11:42 p.m., read, "Tomorrow, the border will bleed." The courtroom gasped when prosecutors revealed the screen name tied to that message: Teresa Y21. By spring of 2025, the narrative was clear. Youngblut was not just present. She was active, vocal, and willing. But the trial would not only decide her fate. It would expose the full reach of the Zizians. Who were they? A cult? A militia? A conspiracy-obsessed underground network? Or just scattered extremists hiding behind a name? For the families of the 6 other victims, the answer hardly mattered. They wanted justice. And for Agent Maland's family, justice meant one thing: accountability. His wife, during her testimony, looked directly at Youngblut and said through tears, "You took my husband from me. You took my children's father. But you will not take his honor." That stays with us. On August 15, 2025, 9 a.m., federal prosecutors formally filed notice. The United States would seek the death penalty against Teresa Youngblut. If convicted, she would be executed. If spared, she would face life in federal prison without parole. The case now stands as one of the most significant domestic terror prosecutions of 2025. The trial looms, and the questions remain. Did Youngblut act alone? Are more Zizians out there, waiting? And how deep does this network truly go? For the people of Vermont, for the grieving family of Agent Maland, and for investigators across the country, the answers cannot come fast enough. Here at Crimes Uncoded, we're not just telling crime stories. We're breaking down the legal codes that define them. Make sure to subscribe, because next up, the perfect murder and the law that couldn't touch it.